Today on working with LottieFiles State Machine, we have this interactive CTA button. Let me show you how it works or what it is, and then I'll dive into how to set it up, the animation, interactivity, and all. So we have pointer control here. The cat's eyes, they follow your pointer as you move around the canvas. That's the first control. And if you hover over the cat itself, it frowns at you because you're not supposed to be hovering over the cat. You're supposed to be hovering over the CTA button and then perform the action. And if you click on the cat, it will tell you you're supposed to click on the button, not it. Then if you hover over the get started button, that's the CTA, the cat lights up, its eyes widen, it starts to blush. It's just in anticipation of what you are supposed to do, like what it expects you to do. And if you finally click on the get started button, it gives you some love. It just really appreciates you, and then there's love flying out. So I think this is just a fun way to make a CTA button more fun, more interactive. You understand? So it essentially takes off the burden of you asking your prospective client or your customers to do something. It makes this engaging. It makes it an engaging and a fun experience for them, and it still work. You can just move around the cursor, and his eyes will basically just follow you. And if you stop hovering, it will look at you. If you hover over the cat, it frowns. If you click on it, it tells you, click the button, not me. And then this. And if you don't do any action, if you don't perform any action for a couple of seconds, it will tell you I. It will wait again. If you still don't perform any action, it will prompt you to click on the button, click the button to begin. And if you still don't perform any action, it will tell you, don't be stubborn, just click on the button. And then that loop will continue. It will be in this idle state till you either perform an action or it will continue. So, like I said, I think this is just a fun way to make CTAs on website or apps more engaging, more fun, more interactive. And this was really inspired by Yamin's robot animation. I saw this animation. He posted it in the community, and I really loved it. I love the pointer control. The way he implemented this is there are different states, and he coded it in such a way if you are typing, the robot will show typing animation. If you get the typing correct, it will show you success, and it has this idle state. So what I basically did is I remixed the animation in Lottie Creator, and I was able to see all of his secrets, how he did the pointer control, the transitions, and everything. So I took the same principle and I just designed my own animation, but I made it a CTA button, and I implemented most of the inputs, the interactions, the transitions that I did. So I'm going to show you how the animation works now, and then show you how I've implemented all of the interaction for this particular animation. So the animation basically started in Adobe Illustrator. This is where I did the designs, the cat, everything. And then I went into After Effects and I did the animation for all the segments that I wanted. Including, this is the over state, and this is the eyes following the cursor. And lastly, the final animation when you finally click the button. And I have some boxes here that I've made. So if you notice, there's a grid here, and for each grid I've made boxes for them, and I'll show you why in a couple of seconds in Lottie Creator why I've created this. Let me just over on one and make it opaque. So what I did is I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rectangles, and then I reduced the opacity to 0. So this is what I basically use for the pointer control. I'll show you how that works in a minute. So let's go back to Lottie Creator now and go to the animate section. So I imported the animation into Lottie Creator and I broke it down so I can have access to individual layers. And these are the boxes here. These are the boxes. So one thing I would recommend is, if you want to do this, don't reduce the opacity in After Effects, because once you import it into Lottie Creator, what you get is that the layer opacity will be at 0. And that if the layer opacity is at 0, the pointer control I'm going to show you is not going to work. So what you can do is leave it fully opaque in After Effects, and then once you import it into Lottie Creator, reduce the fill opacity instead of the layer opacity itself, so that the pointer control is going to work. So what you have to do is create rectangles around where you want the pointer control to work, and then create animations that face that direction. So for this particular left bottom rectangle, I created an animation. Let me just show you the segment for that. Left bottom. Let me play this. And then, yeah, so this is the segment for that. So it's just looking at that particular angle. So for each angle where your rectangles are, you are going to create animations that are going to face that direction, if that is what you're doing. So these are all the sections I've created. Let me just play the sections from the beginning. This is the I do state. This is the I state, the segments, the click the button, the don't be stubborn section. Click the button, not me, if you eventually click on the cat, not the button. This is when you start hovering over that particular button. So the button itself lights up, and then the cat starts blushing. It widens in its eyes in anticipation for you clicking the button. And then the bottom, and then we have looking in different directions. Cat over, when you hover over the cat, it gives you attitude, because you are not supposed to be hovering over the cat. You're supposed to be hovering over the button and then clicking the button. And then once you finally click the the button, you get this particular animation. Like I said, for this pointer control to work, make sure you create your animation that are looking at the boxes you've created. They are looking in the direction of the boxes, and then don't add any transitional state. Just the segments should just be looking at that boxes, because we are going to be twinning between animations. So let's just go to State Machines, and I'll show you how this particular interactivity works. So this is State Machine. Let's just play through the animation one more time so you can be abreast of what we are going to create. We have pointer control. Once you move your pointer around the animation, it looks around. If you hover over the button, you get this particular, the button lights up, the cat changes expression, and if you click on it, it gives you some love. If you hover over the cat, it frowns at you, and if you click on the cat, it tells you, click the button, not me. So let's recreate this. I'm going to create a new state machine, and then we are going to recreate this from scratch. So I'm going to click on the plus icon here, increase this size a bit so I can see this wall, and then go to that state machine that I just created. So how do we make this work? We need a global state. This is a state that all of our segments will move from. So let me just show you how to create a global state. Just drag the global state here and add it to your timeline. So it makes it the initial state. So this in itself is not going to do anything for you, because it's an empty state. So we need to define what our global state will be. And then I want this I do state here. I'm just going to bring the I do state here. I want this to be our global state. So if we are not performing any of the actions, we are not hovering over the cars, we are not moving our pointer, this I do state should always play. And once we finish over any action, it should move back to this I do state. That is the major goal for this interactivity. So how do we make this I do state the global state? What we can do is we can add an input. Now we are going to add an input. We are going to call it state. And we are going to make this string, because we want to use unique values for our transitions, unique values for our segment. So for the I do state, I'm just going to call it I do. This is going to be the default state for this particular input, I do. So doing this like this, make sure that every time we are not doing any action, it returns to this I do state. Then I'm going to click on save. So we have the input here. then we are going to use that particular input to connect this global state to this segment. Let me play the segment itself so you can see what it looks like. So it's just the cats moving, and we are going to set this to infinite loop. We want this to continue looping. We don't want it to stop. So it will continue looping. So we are going to use this inputs to connect the global state to the idle state. And then we are going to make this, for this particular interaction, we are going to be mostly twinning. We are not going to use immediate. I'm going to twin. Make this a linear twinning. I don't want any easing on it. So if you don't know what twinning is, it's just in this particular context, it's just state machines creating in between animation between two animations, so we don't have to create them manually. So for example, from this idle state, we've removed the cursor to the top right. Instead of us creating that transitional state between those two segments, State Machines is going to twin between those animations. So it's going to create the in-between. Let me show you what that looks like in practicality. So if I play this, it is in the idle state. And if I move the cursor to the right, so that particular transition in itself is twinning. So from looking straight at the audience to looking to the right, that's State Machines twinning between those two segments. So if I stop this and I play the, I think this is, let me just confirm. So this is the right mid. If I play the right mid section in itself, it's just looking at that side. That particular transition from looking forward to that side is not there. So that is State Machine making the intermediate animation between that particular idle state and looking to the right. So that's why we are going to be using twinning for most of our animation in this particular interactivity. So after we've added the type of transition, we have to add a condition to that particular transition. So I want to say, move from here, make this, I want to make this the global state by making sure our state, the input, is equals to idle. So if I play that, you see that it just moves from global state to idle. So practically what we've done is we've made this idle our global state. So all of our animations will, in practical, in theory, return to this state if once we stop them. So let's continue. From here, what I want to do is I want to make this idle count, do some cycles, and then move to the animations like greeting the user, clicking, encouraging them to click the button. And if they don't click the button, it will give them a little bit of, the cat will give them a little bit of attitude and tell them not to be stubborn. So how do I do that? I have to create an input, a number input that I will use as a counter. So I'm going to make this idle counter. And the type of input is going to be numeric. So because I want this to be number and I want the default to be 0. On idle, I want to say on loop complete action, do an increment of idle counter plus 1. So what I've just done is, if you look over the inputs here, every time a loop continues, every time a loop of this idle completes, this idle counter is going to go up by 1. So as it completes, it's going to be 5. It's going to be 5. Now I can use this particular input to move from this particular idle to any other segment that I want. So how do I do that? I'm going to move my next section here, which is the I. Bring it here. And I'm going to connect this to this and then add a transition. I'm going to do twinned 0.1 millisecond because I want it to be very, very fast. I want it to be a linear type of transition. Then I'm going to add a condition that says when our idle counter is equals to 1, move into the state. So let's see how that works. 1, and then it moves into the I state. But how do I return to this idle state from here? So I can use the same counter to move back into the idle state. So from here, I need to add on complete action. So once this particular animation, this segment completes, I want to add 1 to the idle counter again. I'm going to do another increment here. I'm going to do idle counter plus 1. Then I can now use this to return back to the idle state. So add a transition there, then twin, make it a linear transition, then add a condition that says once the idle counter is equals to 2, move back to this state. So what we've done is once this idle counter is 1, it moves here. Then once it is 2, it moves back to the idle state. So let's test that out. 1, 2. It's 2 now, and then it moves back to the idle state. So what is making that go to 2 is this incomplete action that we added. So this idle counter plus 1 is what is making this counter increase to 2 once it is this state. Then we are using that 2 to move back into the idle state. So we have another idle animation. That's the one encouraging them to click the button. So let's just play that. So click the button to begin. So we can still use the counter to move here. And you can say once this gets to 3, let's twin first. Let's configure our transition. 1, linear. Let's try 3. So once our idle counter gets to 3, we want to move here. So that works. We can now add our return transition to the idle, but first we need to add incomplete action. So the difference between incomplete action and unloop complete action is if you are just playing an animation once, you are going to use incomplete action. That means once the animation plays once, perform this particular action. But if you are looping the animation, you have to use unloop complete action because the loop is still continuing. So you can't use incomplete action because you are not playing the animation once. But for this, we want this to play this, click the button once. So we are going to leave it, the loop to 1, and then add incomplete action and increment. Idle counter, we want to add 1 every time this particular action completes. And then we can use that to configure the return animation and say add a condition that says when our idle counter is equals to 4, move back to the idle state. So let's try that out quickly. 1, 2, 3 is on 3 now. Then once this completes, it will be on 4. Then it returns to the idle state once it completes 4. So we have one last idle state. So that's the one that tells the user not to be stubborn and they should click the button. So it's the same process. I'm just going to add this and says once our idle state is equals to 5, move into this state. I'm going to add incomplete action here to increment. Idle counter plus 1 and add a return animation here that says once this is equals to 6. It should be 6. Let me try that out to confirm. 1. So this is 2. 3. It moves to click to begin. 4. It moves back here. 5. Yeah, and then 6. It moves back to the idle state. And then it continues the circle again. Oh, sorry. When we move back here, what I wanted to do is I wanted to start the counter from the beginning so that the cycle will start again. We are not going to do that transition we are not going to use this particular transition. So if you notice, once it completes this particular cycle, it does not go back to 0. And if it does not go back to 0, we cannot move back to 1 for this particular segment to work. So it's on 3 right now. 3 is where it comes here. And it's on 5. Although it moves back to idle, it will not move into this other state because the counter is not going back to 0 to move back to 1. The transition here uses idle counter is equals to 1. The transition here uses idle counter is equals to 3. So how do we make sure after this particular third one and finish playing, it moves back to the idle state? So what we can do instead is, instead of adding an increment, we can do on complete action and then set input value. We are going to set the idle counter back to 0. And then we are going to use that idle counter is equals to 0 to make the transition. So we've achieved two things with that particular move. Now, after this finishes playing, it sets our idle counter back to 0. And then we are able to move back to the idle state and replay this whole section over and over again if the user does not perform any action. So let's try that out. It's on 3 now. It's on 4, it moves back to idle. On 5, it moves into this. Then once this completes, it sets it back to 0. And then we can start the whole section again. So that's how you configure any kind of section that you want that has to do with timer, like an idle state that you want something to happen if any action is not happening. So that's how you do that. You can easily just create a number input and then use that number to make a counter, and then use those counter to move between your idle state and the other substates, so to speak, of your idle state. So the next thing I want to configure now is the button overing. So I have that section here, button over loop. I'm going to bring it down here. Then I'm going to connect the global state to it, and I'm going to assign a unique, I'm going to make this twin. Like I said, I'm going to be using twinned for this particular animation for the transition. State is equals to, and I'm going to give this a unique value because remember we are using string as our input here. So we have to create unique values for all of our major segments. And then we can use that particular unique value when the state is equals to that particular value to either make transitions to them or move out from that particular segment using that unique string value. So but for the button over, I'm going to give it the unique value button over. Let me play it for you to see what it looks like. So this is the section. When you hover that particular button, this is what I want to play. And then I want to loop this. As long as the user is hovering over this button, I want this to continue looping. So we've configured the transition. The next thing we need to do is add an interaction for the user. So we can go to the interaction section, click on plus, and I want to add a pointer enter. That's the pointer. This is the cursor here. That's the pointer entering into this particular section, the button. And then I'm going to add the button. That's the rectangle. This is why I broke the scene so I can have access to individual layers. And I know for sure that this is the rectangle for that particular button. And I want to add an action. So once the pointer enters this rectangle, I want to set an input value, and I want to set my state equals that unique value that we created when we were creating the transition for this. That will be button over. Then I'm going to save this. So let's try that out. So it's working. And as long as I'm hovering over that particular button, it will continue looping that segment. But if I move away, it still continues looping the segment, and that's not what I want. So what I can do is I can just create a reverse interaction. So once the user stops hovering over this particular button, it returns back to the idle state. So how do we do that? We can add an interaction here of pointer exits and choose our rectangle again. That's the pointer exits, the pointer, which is the cursor, leaving the rectangle. So this is the rectangle here for the button. Then the action will be, we want to set our state back to idle. So if I play this and I over it, it's going to repeat playing the pointer over. But once I stop overing, it's going to set that our state back to idle, and then we can move back to the idle state. So if I stop now, it moves back to the idle state. And then our eye will play this particular segment here. We start playing. But if I over it, it's working, and then I can exit, and then it stops that particular segment. So the next thing I want to configure is my button click. So if you click over the button, I have a segment for that here too. Oh, this is the wrong segment. So this is the right one here. And I think I already have it on my canvas because it's saying _1, but I can't find it. Oh, okay, it's right here, button clicked. So this is the right one here. And I can also just make a transition from the global state, which is technically the idle state, to this particular segment. Let me play the segment here. So this is the segment here. Once the button is clicked, then I want to loop these two. I want it to continue looping until another action comes to it. So for the transition, I'm still going to do the same thing I did for the button over. I'm going to twin this. Use 0.1 milliseconds. So it's very, very fast. It is barely noticeable. Then add a condition that says once our state is equals to button clicked, you are the one that will define what you want this particular state will be. So right here is where you define the value for that particular segment. So it is up to you whatever you want to call the transition or that particular segment. So once we've done that, I want to also create an interaction. So this will be click. I don't want it to be pointer enter because I want the users to be able to actually click the button, not over it. And then I'm going to choose my rectangle, the button. Then I want to set input value. State is equals to button clicked. And then I'm going to save this. So let's see if that works. I'm going to hover over it and then I'm going to click. So it's working. And then if I move my cursor in this state, if I move my cursor out of that particular state, it stops the animation. So that's okay. That's fine by me. So let me just configure a few other of the, let me do the pointer control so you see how it works. So let's try for the bottom. I'm going to find the bottom section. I think this is it right here. Bring it onto my canvas. So this is the section right here. I'm going to loop it. So I want it to continue looking down once the cursor is hovering in this particular area here. So I'm just going to connect it with the global state, then define my transition, add a condition that says once the state is equals to bottom, that's what I want. So the transition is already configured. I'm going to add an interaction here. So pointer enter, and this is where that particular box that we created will come in and in. So this is it here, this bottom box here. I'm going to show you in the anime section. What do we want? We want to set our action state is equals to bottom. Let's save that and see if that works. So it's playing. If I move my cursor here, it's looking down. But if I move my cursor away, it's still looking down. So how do we create the reverse interaction? So it's just the same thing. Create a pointer exit, select that particular rectangle that you've created for that section. Then you can add an action that sets the input value back to idle once the cursor leaves that particular state. So it's here, it's going to be looking down. Once I exit that state, it moves back to idle. So let me show you the rectangle that I'm currently using for that. So this is the bottom rectangle here. So basically it's there, but it's not there because the fill opacity, I've reduced that to 0. So you cannot see it in the animation. And then I've created a section for that. This is the section here. Let me find that section. So this is the section that the segments that is playing once you create the interaction for that particular rectangle. So although I've confirmed from the LottieFiles team that more pointer controls are coming to State Machine, but this is a little hack you can use if you are currently impatient like me and you want to start using pointer control in State Machines as of right now. So we can still move from year to year. State Machines is going to twin between those particular segments. And you can see we did not, in that, let me go back to the animate section. And for that segment, the bottom segment, what we have is the cat looking at that particular rectangle. That's what I'm saying. But in the State Machines, you notice that State Machines is able to comfortably twin between those two segments, the bottom and the button over. And it feels like the cat is actually opening his eyes. The animation is very, very smooth, even though we did not create it manually. So we did not create this transition manually. So that's just State Machine twinning between the two segments. And that is because we are using the twinned type of transition here. That's why we are using this a lot in this particular animation. So let me just create a couple of pointer control, maybe 2 more, and then it's still the same thing to create the rest. You can just create that. Let me say this particular animation here is available. Just search for it on the LottieFiles platform. And if you want to maybe remix it, do anything with it, check the way it works, the type of transition use, input and everything, just click on the remix in Lottie creator button. And I'm going to make this particular animation available on the LottieFiles platform too. So check the description or comment of this video. You can go here, change the call to action, maybe change this to download now, whatever you want to use it for. You can dissect the animation, check out the transition. That is really how you get comfortable with any kind of tool. So let's create for the right bottom. I think that's why I called it. So that's just my own naming convention, so I can easily identify this segment. So this is it right here, and I'm going to connect that using the right bottom. I'm going to make this a twin transition, 0.1 millisecond to make it very fast. I want it to be linear, and I want to add a condition that says when my state is right bottom. Like I said, you are the one that will define what you want this particular section, this value to be. So for this, I want right bottom. Then I'm going to add an interaction, a pointer enter interaction. Then I'm going to choose the right bottom rectangle that I've created, but it's invisible because we've reduced the opacity to 0. Add an action that sets our input value, our state, to right bottom. And let's not forget to create our reverse animation once the pointer exits that particular state. So this pointer exits, right bottom, add an action that sets our state back to idle. And I'm going to save this. So let's try that out. And then we are looking down. And then if we move to this particular state, State Machines is still able to twin between these two segments comfortably. So it's not very jarring. And it's working perfectly. And if I exit the state, it moves back to the idle state. So that's just the way you create for every other rectangle that you've created. So let's add two more segments here: the over animation for the cat, and then the clicking of the cat itself and not the button. So I have that here. This is the segment for that. Over, cat over, still the same thing. Twinned 0.1 linear. Then I'm going to give this cat over. I'm doing this so I can easily recognize the states and I can easily use them all around. So the value, the naming convention for the values is very similar. It's almost the same with the exemption of the underscore to the naming convention of the naming of the segment itself. So I'm just making things easy for myself. So I'm going to add an interaction for pointer enter. And I have two choices here. I can use the edge layer itself, but I've created another rectangle for that. I think I'm going to use the rectangle. Then add action that sets our input to cat over. Let's try that out. And it frowns as you once you are hovering over it. So I want this to loop. I didn't add a loop here. I don't want it to stop. So if you notice, once it gets to this state, it plays and then it stops. But I want this to loop so the head nodding animation can continue. So how do we do that? You can just add a loop here, make it an infinite loop. So let's try that again. And it will continue. And if you exit, oh, we've not added a reverse animation for that. So let's do that. Reverse interaction. So pointer exit, the head shape. I want to set my input, the state back to idle. So let's try that out. And it goes back to idle. And you can see the state machine twinning between this animation. I know I'm talking a lot about twinning, and I think this is like this will save a lot of creators tons of time, tons of effort in making these manual transitions. And is able to open its eye and change the position of its eyebrow. So state machine is doing all the hard work of the transition between those two states. So let's add the final one here. That's clicking of the cat and not the button for this video. Linear condition state. I'm going to make this cat click. Let me just call this cat click. And I'm going to add an interaction here of pointer. No, I want this to be a click, not pointer enter. Let me use the head layer for this just to be more accurate. This is the head layer here. I want to set input value to state is equals to cat clicked. Then I'm going to save. So let's see what that looks like. So once it's finished that particular that particular segment, I want it to move back to the idle state. I'm thinking of how we can configure that. So I don't want to add a loop here because I want that to be a one-time thing. So let's just add a transition from this back to the idle state, and then we can use twinned You can add the condition that says state is equals to idle once it completes playing that particular segment. So let's try that out. So that's not working for me. What I can do alternatively is, once it's finished playing, I can add on complete action. So I'm just going to try on complete action, set input value, state is equals to idle or whatever state I want. So this is really how you work with state machine. You try things out. If it's not working, you try something else. That's why it's important for you to understand the fundamentals that make the whole state machine work. So let's try that again. It's going to play. Then on complete, it moves back to idle. So that's working as expected. So that's basically it. I can go on to configure the old. What I need to do now is just configure the remaining of the pointer controls, adding the segment, connecting it with a twin transition, and creating interactions for it. But that is what I've done here. If you are interested, like I said, this file will be available in the LottieFiles platform, so you can download it. If you want to change the call to action, maybe you want to use it on your website, you can easily do that by coming to the animate section and find that particular button. So this is it right here. You can just remove this and then add your own text. I've just hidden it. You can remove this and add your own text, and the animation will work the same way you are seeing in this particular video. So let's just look at what we are able to create once more, and then we'll call it a day. So this is the one we created. This is our state machine, and we did just 2 pointer controls, but you can just add the remaining of the pointer control if you want to practice. Then we have the button over, we have the button click, and we have the cat hovering itself. And if you click on the cat, it will just tell you to not click on the cat, click on the button. So that's for this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any question, you want to ask about anything, please feel free to leave comments in the comment section, or you can just message me directly. Bye.